Chapter 1. Happiness Revisited. Introduction. 23 centuries have passed since Aristotle determined that the ultimate ambition of men and women is happiness. While other desirable things, health, wealth, beauty, or power, are valued because we believe they will lead us to happiness, happiness itself is sought for no other reason than its own sake. In the millennia since Aristotle's time, our knowledge of the physical world has evolved dramatically. We have unlocked the secrets of the atom and the stars, wielding powers that would have made the Greek gods tremble. Yet concerning the most vital aspect of our existence, we have advanced little, if at all. We understand happiness no better than the ancients, and the art of achieving it remains as elusive as ever. Despite our increased longevity and health, and despite a level of material comfort that even the Sun King would envy, surrounded by technologies and luxuries undreamed of in the past, many people feel their lives are wasted. Instead of contentment, their years are often marked by anxiety and boredom. One must ask, is it the inevitable lot of humanity to remain unfulfilled, forever yearning for more? Or is this malaise the result of seeking satisfaction in the wrong places? This book employs the insights of modern psychology to revisit this ancient question, exploring when and why people feel most happy, in the hope that we might order our lives to include more of this blessed condition. The central discovery of my research is that happiness is not something that merely happens. It is not the fruit of good luck or random chance, nor can it be purchased with money or commanded by power. It does not depend on external events, but rather on how we interpret them. Happiness is a condition that must be cultivated and defended by each individual. Those who learn to control their inner experience determine the quality of their lives, and this is as close as any of us can come to true happiness. Paradoxically, happiness cannot be found by consciously searching for it. As John Stuart Mill observed, ask yourself whether you are happy, and you cease to be so. It is by fully immersing ourselves in the details of our lives, whether good or bad, that we find happiness as an unintended side effect of our dedication to a cause greater than ourselves. The path to this elusive goal is circuitous. It begins with achieving control over the contents of our consciousness. Our perceptions are shaped by forces often beyond our control, our genes, our history, the indifferent laws of physics. Yet, we have all experienced moments where we felt not like pawns of fate, but as masters of our own actions. In these rare moments of optimal experience, we feel a sense of exhilaration and deep enjoyment that becomes a benchmark for what life should be. This is what we call flow. It is the feeling a sailor has when the wind and water hum in harmony with his veins. It is the painter witnessing a living form emerge from the canvas. It is the father seeing his child's first smile. These moments are not passive. They occur when the body or mind is stretched to its limits in a voluntary effort to accomplish something difficult and worthwhile. Optimal experience is something we make happen. It is the mastery of the swimmer beating his own record, or the violinist perfecting a complex passage. In the long run, these experiences add up to a sense of mastery and participation in life that comes closer to happiness than anything else we can imagine. Overview. Although the concept of flow has been explored in academic circles, this work aims to present these findings to a general audience. However, this is not a how-to book offering a recipe for happiness. Such a recipe is impossible, for a joyful life is a unique, individual creation. Instead, the objective is to present general principles and concrete examples of how ordinary people have transformed boring or meaningless lives into ones filled with enjoyment. This journey requires intellect and commitment. We will explore how consciousness works and how it can be controlled, for only by understanding the shaping of subjective states can we master them. We will examine how order is established in consciousness through the investment of psychic energy, attention, into realistic goals, and how the matching of skills to challenges creates the flow experience. We will look at the conditions of flow, the activities that produce it, and the personalities that sustain it. We will explore how to find flow in the body through sports and senses, and in the mind through literature, philosophy, and science. We will address the transformation of work into a flow activity and the art of enjoying relationships with family and friends. Finally, we will discuss how to cope with tragedy and how to weave all experiences into a meaningful pattern, creating a life theme that leaves no room for unfulfilled desires. The obstacles to this fulfillment are inherent in the human condition. The universe was not created to serve our needs, and frustration is woven into the fabric of life. Furthermore, our chronic dissatisfaction ensures that as soon as one need is met, another arises. To overcome these barriers, we must learn to derive moment-by-moment enjoyment from everything we do. The roots of discontent. The primary reason happiness is so difficult to achieve is that the universe is indifferent to our comfort. We live in a cosmos of immense violence and cold emptiness on a fragile planet where survival has been a struggle against the elements for millions of years. Even as we overcome natural dangers, we create new threats: pollution, sophisticated weaponry, and social strife. The universe is not hostile, nor is it friendly. It is simply indifferent. Chaos is the natural state of the cosmos from the perspective of human desires. While we cannot change the universe, we can change how we interpret our experience of it. Happiness depends on inner harmony, not on control over external forces. Mastering the environment is necessary for survival, but it does not guarantee a good life. To achieve that, we must master our consciousness. For many, the goal is simply survival. But once basic needs are met, new desires emerge. With affluence comes escalating expectations. The paradox of rising expectations suggests that improving the quality of life is an endless task. However, the problem lies not in the desire for more, but in the failure to enjoy the struggle of getting there. When we fixate only on the destination, we forfeit the joy of the journey. There are those who have escaped this treadmill. Regardless of their material conditions, they lead vigorous, open lives, learning until the end and enjoying whatever they do. They are in control of their lives. The shields of culture. Throughout history, cultures have developed myths, religions, and beliefs to shield us from the chaos of the universe. These structures reassure us that we are central to the cosmic plan and that our efforts matter. However, when a culture becomes too confident in its mastery over nature, it risks a rude awakening. When the shields fail, as they did for the Romans, the Chinese, or the Aztecs, people lose their courage and flounder in anxiety. We see similar symptoms of disillusionment today. Despite our wealth and liberty, a pervasive malaise affects us. The old shields, religion, patriotism, tradition, no longer provide the security they once did. Many suffer from existential dread, a fear that life has no meaning. As we age, the question, "Is this all there is?" haunts us. We realize that the promises of our youth, that the future would be bright and bountiful, were largely illusions. In response, some redouble their efforts to acquire more money, more power, more status, only to find the goal receding. Others try to fix the symptoms through diets, health clubs, or self-help fads. But these piecemeal solutions fail to address the core emptiness. Some withdraw into hobbies or chemical escapes. Religion, once a universal answer, now competes with scientific rationality, leaving many without a definitive worldview. The evidence of our collective malaise is irrefutable. Despite our material progress, social pathology is on the rise: violent crime, family disintegration, addiction, and a decline in basic literacy. We have increased our material power 1,000-fold, yet we have not advanced in improving the content of our experience. Reclaiming experience. To escape this predicament, we must take matters into our own hands. Psychology can offer tools not just to understand our past, but to improve our future. The key is to become independent of the social environment, to stop responding exclusively to its rewards and punishments. We must learn to provide our own rewards. This requires a shift in attitude. We are conditioned to delay gratification, to work for a future that never arrives. We are always getting to live, Emerson said, but never living. Civilization demands this repression of desire for social order, but we need not be puppets of social control. Society uses our biological instincts, survival, sexuality, aggression, to manipulate us. If we simply follow our instincts, we are not free. We are merely obeying genetic instructions exploited by external forces. Real liberation comes from independence from both biological drives and social controls. It means learning to take charge of what happens in the mind. If we can find enjoyment and meaning in the stream of life itself, in the process of living, we free ourselves from the treadmill of future expectations. We transform reality by influencing what happens in our consciousness. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by external things, it is not they that disturb you, but your own judgment of them. And it is in your power to wipe out that judgment now." Paths of liberation. The knowledge that controlling consciousness determines the quality of life is ancient. It was inscribed at Delphi as "Know thyself," recognized by Aristotle and practiced by Stoics and Christian monks. In the East, yoga and Zen developed sophisticated techniques to free the mind from the tyranny of biological urges and social chaos. If this wisdom has been known for so long, why have we not mastered it? There are two main reasons. First, this kind of knowledge is not cumulative. It cannot be memorized like a formula. It must be earned through trial and error by each individual in every generation. It requires will and discipline, like learning an instrument or a sport. Second, the method of control must be reformulated to fit the cultural context of the time. The specific rituals of a mystic in ancient Persia may not resonate in contemporary California. The essence must be separated from the cultural accidents. Furthermore, successful methods often become institutionalized and lose their vitality, turning into rigid norms that no longer liberate. In every epoch, we must rethink how to establish autonomy in consciousness. The insights of the past, from the Gospels to Freud, remain valid, but we must apply them to our own times. The contemporary approach involves understanding how consciousness works and how to control the quality of experience. By doing so, we can rid ourselves of anxiety and become free of societal controls, taking or leaving its rewards as we choose. Chapter 2. The Anatomy of Consciousness. The Limits of Consciousness. To understand how we might achieve mastery over our lives, we must first divest ourselves of the illusion that our minds are infinite. While we often dream of a consciousness capable of processing everything, feeling every emotion, capturing every detail of the visual world, and entertaining endless thoughts simultaneously, the reality of our biological equipment is far more humble. The human nervous system, despite its complexity, operates with a finite capacity. It can process only a specific amount of information at any given moment. This limitation is not merely a trivial biological fact, it is the fundamental boundary within which our lives play out. If we attempt to listen to a conversation while reading a book, we quickly discover that we cannot truly attend to both. The mind must toggle back and forth, creating gaps in our comprehension of one or the other. We are restricted by a bottleneck of attention. Over the span of a lifetime, this determines the content of our existence. Because we can only experience a limited amount of information, what we choose to admit into the sacred space of our consciousness determines the texture and quality of our lives. We are, in a very real sense, the sum of what we have attended to. Attention as psychic energy. If consciousness is the theater in which our lives are enacted, attention is the spotlight that illuminates the stage. It is the mechanism by which we select information from the chaotic bombardment of sensory data and bring it into awareness. Without this selective focus, we would be overwhelmed by the sheer volume of sights, sounds, and sensations that surround us. Attention allows us to retrieve memories, evaluate events, and plan for the future. It is useful to think of attention not merely as a passive window, but as a form of psychic energy. It is a resource that is available to us, but it is limited. Every thought we think, every desire we feel, and every action we take depletes this energy store. When we burn this fuel on anxiety, worry, or trivial distractions, we have less of it remaining to invest in the goals that might enrich us. The way we deploy this energy ultimately defines who we are. One individual might scatter their attention like seeds in the wind, reacting impulsively to every flashing light or loud noise, resulting in a fragmented and shallow experience of reality. Another might discipline this energy, focusing it like a laser beam on a complex problem or a beautiful composition, thereby creating a life of depth and achievement. To control one's life is, essentially, to control one's attention. Enter the self. In the center of this flow of information resides a construct we call the self. It is natural to assume that the self is the captain of the ship, a distinct entity directing the spotlight of attention. However, upon closer inspection, we see that the self is actually a part of the contents of consciousness. It is a structure built from the information we have admitted into our minds over time, our memories, our beliefs, and most importantly, the hierarchy of our goals. There exists a circular relationship between the self and attention. The self directs attention toward things that sustain it. The musician attends to sounds, the financier to markets. But the self is also shaped by where attention has been directed in the past. If a person invests their psychic energy in cultivating a garden, their self gradually incorporates the identity of a gardener. If they invest it in resentment, they become a resentful person. The self is not a static object, it is a dynamic organization of goals that is constantly being constructed and reconstructed by the way we use our energy. Disorder in consciousness, psychic entropy. Unfortunately, the organization of the self is fragile. We are constantly exposed to information that conflicts with our goals or threatens our identity. When such information enters consciousness, pain, fear, rage, jealousy, or anxiety, it creates a state of internal disorder. This condition is known as psychic entropy. When entropy strikes, the efficiency of the self is compromised. Attention, which should be free to invest in external tasks or internal growth, is instead forced to turn inward to defend the self's integrity. We brood, we worry, we battle against the intrusion. A person consumed by the fear of losing a job or the sting of a personal rejection has little psychic energy left to enjoy a sunset or solve a complex problem. The structure of the self becomes shaken, and until order is restored, the quality of experience deteriorates into stagnation and distress. Order in consciousness, flow. The opposite of this chaotic state is optimal experience. When the information entering our awareness is congruent with our goals, when we receive feedback that confirms our actions are justified and our skills are adequate, psychic energy flows effortlessly. There is no need for worry. There is no need to question one's own worth. The self is not threatened, so attention is free to be directed entirely outward toward the task at hand. This state of ordered consciousness is what we call flow. In flow, the distinction between the actor and the action dissolves. The climber becomes one with the rock. The painter becomes one with the canvas. It is a state of intense concentration where time seems to distort. Hours pass like minutes, and the usual chatter of the mind falls silent. Because the experience is harmonious, the self emerges from it not broken or defensive, but strengthened. Complexity and the growth of the self. The pursuit of flow is not merely about finding pleasure, it is the engine of psychological growth. When we engage in a flow activity, we are often stretching our capabilities to their limit. To maintain the experience, we must refine our skills to meet increasing challenges. As we do this, the self becomes more complex. Complexity is composed of two distinct but complementary processes: differentiation and integration. Differentiation means becoming unique, developing skills and perspectives that separate us from the crowd. Integration means finding connections, uniting with others, and harmonizing our own inner contradictions. Flow fosters both. By overcoming challenges, we become more unique and skilled individuals. Differentiation. By immersing ourselves in a system of rules and action, whether a sport, an art, or a community, we connect with something larger than ourselves. Integration. A self that is merely differentiated is selfish. A self that is merely integrated is conformist. The complex self, forged in the fires of flow, is both autonomous and connected, constantly growing beyond its previous limits. Chapter 3. Enjoyment and the quality of life. Pleasure and enjoyment. There are two primary strategies we can adopt to improve the quality of life. The first is to try making external conditions match our goals. The second is to change how we experience external conditions to make them fit our goals better. For instance, feeling secure is an important component of happiness. The sense of security can be improved by buying a gun, installing strong locks on the front door, moving to a safer neighborhood, exerting political pressure on City Hall for more police protection, or helping the community to become more conscious of the importance of civil order. All these different responses are aimed at bringing conditions in the environment more in line with our goals. The other method by which we can feel more secure involves modifying what we mean by security. If one does not expect perfect safety, recognizes that risks are inevitable, and succeeds in enjoying a less than ideally predictable world, the threat of insecurity will not have as great a chance of marring happiness. Neither of these strategies is effective when used alone. Changing external conditions might seem to work at first, but if a person is not in control of his consciousness, the old fears or desires will soon return, reviving previous anxieties. One cannot create a complete sense of inner security, even by buying one's own Caribbean island and surrounding it with armed bodyguards and attack dogs. The myth of King Midas well illustrates the point that controlling external conditions does not necessarily improve existence. Like most people, King Midas supposed that if he were to become immensely rich, his happiness would be assured. So he made a pact with the gods, who after much haggling granted his wish that everything he touched would turn into gold. King Midas thought he had made an absolutely first-rate deal. Nothing was to prevent him now from becoming the richest and therefore the happiest man in the world. But we know how the story ends. Midas soon came to regret his bargain because the food in his mouth and the wine on his palate turned to gold before he could swallow them, and so he died surrounded by golden plates and golden cups. The old fable continues to echo down the centuries. The waiting rooms of psychiatrists are filled with rich and successful patients who, in their 40s or 50s, suddenly wake up to the fact that a plush suburban home, expensive cars, and even an Ivy League education are not enough to bring peace of mind. Yet people keep hoping that changing the external conditions of their lives will provide a solution. If only they could earn more money, be in better physical shape, or have a more understanding partner, they would really have it made. Even though we recognize that material success may not bring happiness, we engage in an endless struggle to reach external goals, expecting that they will improve life. Wealth, status, and power have become in our culture all too powerful symbols of happiness. When we see people who are rich, famous, or good-looking, we tend to assume that their lives are rewarding, even though all the evidence might point to their being miserable. And we assume that if only we could acquire some of those same symbols, we would be much happier. If we do actually succeed in becoming richer or more powerful, we believe, at least for a time, that life as a whole has improved. But symbols can be deceptive. They have a tendency to distract from the reality they are supposed to represent. And the reality is that the quality of life does not depend directly on what others think of us or on what we own. The bottom line is rather how we feel about ourselves and about what happens to us. To improve life, one must improve the quality of experience. This is not to say that money, physical fitness, or fame are irrelevant to happiness. They can be genuine blessings, but only if they help to make us feel better. Otherwise, they are at best neutral, at worst obstacles to a rewarding life. When considering the kind of experience that makes life better, most people first think that happiness consists in experiencing pleasure, good food, good sex, all the comforts that money can buy. We imagine the satisfaction of traveling to exotic places or being surrounded by interesting company and expensive gadgets. If we cannot afford those goals that slick commercials and colorful ads keep reminding us to pursue, then we are happy to settle for a quiet evening in front of the television set with a glass of liquor close by. Pleasure is a feeling of contentment that one achieves whenever information in consciousness says that expectations set by biological programs or by social conditioning have been met. The taste of food when we are hungry is pleasant because it reduces a physiological imbalance. Resting in the evening while passively absorbing information from the media, with alcohol or drugs to dull the mind overexcited by the demands of work, is pleasantly relaxing. Traveling to Acapulco is pleasant because the stimulating novelty restores our palate jaded by the repetitive routines of everyday life, and because we know that this is how the beautiful people also spend their time. Pleasure is an important component of the quality of life, but by itself it does not bring happiness. Sleep, rest, food, and sex provide restorative homeostatic experiences that return consciousness to order after the needs of the body intrude and cause psychic entropy to occur. But they do not produce psychological growth. They do not add complexity to the self. Pleasure helps to maintain order, but by itself cannot create new order in consciousness. When people ponder further about what makes their lives rewarding, they tend to move beyond pleasant memories and begin to remember other events, other experiences that overlap with pleasurable ones but fall into a category that deserves a separate name: enjoyment. Enjoyable events occur when a person has not only met some prior expectation or satisfied a need or a desire, but also gone beyond what he or she has been programmed to do and achieved something unexpected, perhaps something even unimagined before. Enjoyment is characterized by this forward movement, by a sense of novelty, of accomplishment. Playing a close game of tennis that stretches one's ability is enjoyable, as is reading a book that reveals things in a new light, as is having a conversation that leads us to express ideas we didn't know we had. Closing a contested business deal, or any piece of work well done, is enjoyable. None of these experiences may be particularly pleasurable at the time they are taking place, but afterward we think back on them and say, "That really was fun," and wish they would happen again. After an enjoyable event, we know that we have changed, that our self has grown. In some respect, we have become more complex as a result of it. Experiences that give pleasure can also give enjoyment, but the two sensations are quite different. For instance, everybody takes pleasure in eating. To enjoy food, however, is more difficult. A gourmet enjoys eating, as does anyone who pays enough attention to a meal so as to discriminate the various sensations provided by it. As this example suggests, we can experience pleasure without any investment of psychic energy, whereas enjoyment happens only as a result of unusual investments of attention. A person can feel pleasure without any effort if the appropriate centers in his brain are electrically stimulated, or as a result of the chemical stimulation of drugs. But it is impossible to enjoy a tennis game, a book, or a conversation unless attention is fully concentrated on the activity. It is for this reason that pleasure is so evanescent, and that the self does not grow as a consequence of pleasurable experiences. Complexity requires investing psychic energy in goals that are new, that are relatively challenging. It is easy to see this process in children. During the first few years of life, every child is a little learning machine, trying out new movements, new words daily. The rapt concentration on the child's face as she learns each new skill is a good indication of what enjoyment is about, and each instance of enjoyable learning adds to the complexity of the child's developing self. Unfortunately, this natural connection between growth and enjoyment tends to disappear with time. Perhaps because learning becomes an external imposition when schooling starts, the excitement of mastering new skills gradually wears out. It becomes all too easy to settle down within the narrow boundaries of the self developed in adolescence. But if one gets to be too complacent, feeling that psychic energy invested in new directions is wasted unless there is a good chance of reaping extrinsic rewards for it, one may end up no longer enjoying life, and pleasure becomes the only source of positive experience. The elements of enjoyment. The first surprise we encountered in our study was how similarly very different activities were described when they were going especially well. Apparently, the way a long-distance swimmer felt when crossing the English Channel was almost identical to the way a chess player felt during a tournament or a climber progressing up a difficult rock face. All these feelings were shared, in important respects, by subjects ranging from musicians composing a new quartet to teenagers from the ghetto involved in a championship basketball game. The second surprise was that, regardless of culture, stage of modernization, social class, age or gender, the respondents described enjoyment in very much the same way. What they did to experience enjoyment varied enormously. The elderly Koreans liked to meditate. The teenage Japanese liked to swarm around in motorcycle gangs, but they described how it felt when they enjoyed themselves in almost identical terms. Moreover, the reasons the activity was enjoyed shared many more similarities than differences. In sum, optimal experience and the psychological conditions that make it possible seem to be the same the world over. As our studies have suggested, the phenomenology of enjoyment has 8 major components. When people reflect on how it feels when their experience is most positive, they mention at least one, and often all, of the following. First, the experience usually occurs when we confront tasks we have a chance of completing. Second, we must be able to concentrate on what we are doing. Third and fourth, the concentration is usually possible because the task undertaken has clear goals and provides immediate feedback. Fifth, one acts with a deep but effortless involvement that removes from awareness the worries and frustrations of everyday life. Sixth, enjoyable experiences allow people to exercise a sense of control over their actions. Seventh, concern for the self disappears, yet paradoxically the sense of self emerges stronger after the flow experience is over. Finally, the sense of the duration of time is altered. Hours pass by in minutes, and minutes can stretch out to seem like hours. The combination of all these elements causes a sense of deep enjoyment that is so rewarding people feel that expending a great deal of energy is worthwhile simply to be able to feel it. Sometimes a person reports having an experience of extreme joy, a feeling of ecstasy for no apparent good reason. A bar of haunting music may trigger it, or a wonderful view, or even less. Just a spontaneous sense of well-being. But by far the overwhelming proportion of optimal experiences are reported to occur within sequences of activities that are goal-directed and bounded by rules. Activities that require the investment of psychic energy, and that could not be done without the appropriate skills. It is important to clarify at the outset that an activity need not be active in the physical sense, and the skill necessary to engage in it need not be a physical skill. For instance, one of the most frequently mentioned enjoyable activities the world over is reading. Reading is an activity because it requires the concentration of attention and has a goal, and to do it, one must know the rules of written language. The skills involved in reading include not only literacy, but also the ability to translate words into images, to empathize with fictional characters, to recognize historical and cultural contexts, to anticipate turns of the plot, to criticize and evaluate the author's style, and so on. In this broader sense, any capacity to manipulate symbolic information is a skill, such as the skill of the mathematician to shape quantitative relationships in his head, or the skill of the musician in combining musical notes. Any activity contains a bundle of opportunities for action, or challenges, that require appropriate skills to realize. For those who don't have the right skills, the activity is not challenging, it is simply meaningless. Setting up a chessboard gets the juices of a chess player flowing, but leaves cold anyone who does not know the rules of the game. To most people, the sheer wall of El Capitan in Yosemite Valley is just a huge chunk of featureless rock. But to the climber, it is an arena offering an endlessly complex symphony of mental and physical challenges. One simple way to find challenges is to enter a competitive situation, hence the great appeal of all games and sports that pit a person or team against another. In many ways, competition is a quick way of developing complexity. "He who wrestles with us," wrote Edmund Burke, "strengthens our nerves and sharpens our skill. Our antagonist is our helper." The challenges of competition can be stimulating and enjoyable, but when beating the opponent takes precedence in the mind over performing as well as possible, enjoyment tends to disappear. Competition is enjoyable only when it is a means to perfect one's skills. When it becomes an end in itself, it ceases to be fun. In all the activities people in our study reported engaging in, enjoyment comes at a very specific point. Whenever the opportunities for action perceived by the individual are equal to his or her capabilities. Playing tennis, for instance, is not enjoyable if the two opponents are mismatched. The less skilled player will feel anxious and the better player will feel bored. The same is true of every other activity. A piece of music that is too simple relative to one's listening skills will be boring, while music that is too complex will be frustrating. Enjoyment appears at the boundary between boredom and anxiety, when the challenges are just balanced with the person's capacity to act. When all a person's relevant skills are needed to cope with the challenges of a situation, that person's attention is completely absorbed by the activity. There is no excess psychic energy left over to process any information but what the activity offers. All the attention is concentrated on the relevant stimuli. As a result, one of the most universal and distinctive features of optimal experience takes place. People become so involved in what they are doing that the activity becomes spontaneous, almost automatic. They stop being aware of themselves as separate from the actions they are performing. It is for this reason that we called the optimal experience flow. The short and simple word describes well the sense of seemingly effortless movement. Although the flow experience appears to be effortless, it is far from being so. It often requires strenuous physical exertion or highly disciplined mental activity. It does not happen without the application of skilled performance. Any lapse in concentration will erase it, and yet while it lasts, consciousness works smoothly. Action follows action seamlessly. In normal life, we keep interrupting what we do with doubts and questions. Why am I doing this? Should I perhaps be doing something else? Repeatedly, we question the necessity of our actions and evaluate critically the reasons for carrying them out. But in flow, there is no need to reflect because the action carries us forward as if by magic. The reason it is possible to achieve such complete involvement in a flow experience is that goals are usually clear and feedback immediate. A tennis player always knows what she has to do, return the ball into the opponent's court, and each time she hits the ball, she knows whether she has done well or not. The chess player's goals are equally obvious: to mate the opponent's king before his own is mated. With each move, he can calculate whether he has come closer to this objective. The climber inching up a vertical wall of rock has a very simple goal in mind: to complete the climb without falling. Every second, hour after hour, he receives information that he is meeting that basic goal. Of course, if one chooses a trivial goal, success in it does not provide enjoyment. If I set as my goal to remain alive while sitting on the living room sofa, I also could spend days knowing that I was achieving it, just as the rock climber does. But this realization would not make me particularly happy, whereas the climber's knowledge brings exhilaration to his dangerous ascent. One of the most frequently mentioned dimensions of the flow experience is that, while it lasts, one is able to forget all the unpleasant aspects of life. This feature of flow is an important byproduct of the fact that enjoyable activities require a complete focusing of attention on the task at hand, thus leaving no room in the mind for irrelevant information. In normal everyday existence, we are the prey of thoughts and worries intruding unwanted in consciousness. Because most jobs, and home life in general, lack the pressing demands of flow experiences, concentration is rarely so intense that preoccupations and anxieties can be automatically ruled out. Consequently, the ordinary state of mind involves unexpected and frequent episodes of entropy interfering with the smooth run of psychic energy. This is one reason why flow improves the quality of experience. The clearly structured demands of the activity impose order and exclude the interference of disorder in consciousness. Enjoyment often occurs in games, sports, and other leisure activities that are distinct from ordinary life, where any number of bad things can happen. If a person loses a chess game or botches his hobby, he need not worry. In real life, however, a person who mishandles a business deal may get fired, lose the mortgage on the house, and end up on public assistance. Thus, the flow experience is typically described as involving a sense of control, or more precisely as lacking the sense of worry about losing control that is typical in many situations of normal life. What people enjoy is not the sense of being in control, but the sense of exercising control in difficult situations. It is not possible to experience a feeling of control unless one is willing to give up the safety of protective routines. Only when a doubtful outcome is at stake, and one is able to influence that outcome, can a person really know whether she is in control. When an activity is thoroughly engrossing, there is not enough attention left over to allow a person to consider either the past or the future, or any other temporarily irrelevant stimuli. One item that disappears from awareness deserves special mention because in normal life we spend so much time thinking about it, our own self. The absence of the self from consciousness does not mean that a person in flow has given up the control of his psychic energy, or that she is unaware of what happens in her body or in her mind. In fact, the opposite is usually true. When people first learn about the flow experience, they sometimes assume that lack of self-consciousness has something to do with a passive obliteration of the self, a going with the flow, Southern California style. But in fact, the optimal experience involves a very active role for the self. So, loss of self-consciousness does not involve a loss of self, and certainly not a loss of consciousness, but rather only a loss of consciousness of the self. What slips below the threshold of awareness is the concept of self, the information we use to represent to ourselves who we are. And being able to forget temporarily who we are seems to be very enjoyable. When not preoccupied with ourselves, we actually have a chance to expand the concept of who we are. Loss of self-consciousness can lead to self-transcendence, to a feeling that the boundaries of our being have been pushed forward. One of the most common descriptions of optimal experience is that time no longer seems to pass the way it ordinarily does. The objective, external duration we measure with reference to outside events like night and day, or the orderly progression of clocks, is rendered irrelevant by the rhythms dictated by the activity. Often hours seem to pass by in minutes. In general, most people report that time seems to pass much faster, but occasionally the reverse occurs. Ballet dancers describe how a difficult turn that takes less than a second in real time stretches out for what seems like minutes. The safest generalization to make about this phenomenon is to say that during the flow experience, the sense of time bears little relation to the passage of time as measured by the absolute convention of the clock, the autotelic experience. The key element of an optimal experience is that it is an end in itself. Even if initially undertaken for other reasons, the activity that consumes us becomes intrinsically rewarding. Surgeons speak of their work. It is so enjoyable that I would do it even if I didn't have to. Sailors say, I'm spending a lot of money and time on this boat, but it is worth it. Nothing quite compares with the feeling I get when I am out sailing. The term autotelic derives from two Greek words, auto meaning self and telos meaning goal. It refers to a self-contained activity, one that is done not with the expectation of some future benefit, but simply because the doing itself is the reward. Playing the stock market in order to make money is not an autotelic experience, but playing it in order to prove one's skill at foretelling future trends is, even though the outcome in terms of dollars and cents is exactly the same. Teaching children in order to turn them into good citizens is not autotelic, whereas teaching them because one enjoys interacting with children is. What transpires in the two situations is ostensibly identical. What differs is that when the experience is autotelic, the person is paying attention to the activity for its own sake. When it is not, the attention is focused on its consequences. Most things we do are neither purely autotelic nor purely exotelic, as we shall call activities done for external reasons only, but are a combination of the two. Surgeons usually enter into their long period of training because of exotelic expectations. To help people, to make money, to achieve prestige. If they are lucky, after a while they begin to enjoy their work, and then surgery becomes to a large extent also autotelic. Some things we are initially forced to do against our will turn out in the course of time to be intrinsically rewarding. Most enjoyable activities are not natural. They demand an effort that initially one is reluctant to make. But once the interaction starts to provide feedback to the person's skills, it usually begins to be intrinsically rewarding. An autotelic experience is very different from the feelings we typically have in the course of life. So much of what we ordinarily do has no value in itself, and we do it only because we have to do it, or because we expect some future benefit from it. Many people feel that the time they spend at work is essentially wasted. They are alienated from it, and the psychic energy invested in the job does nothing to strengthen their self. For quite a few people, free time is also wasted. Leisure provides a relaxing respite from work, but it generally consists of passively absorbing information without using any skills or exploring new opportunities for action. As a result, life passes in a sequence of boring and anxious experiences over which a person has little control. The autotelic experience, or flow, lifts the course of life to a different level. Alienation gives way to involvement. Enjoyment replaces boredom. Helplessness turns into a feeling of control. And psychic energy works to reinforce the sense of self instead of being lost in the service of external goals. When experience is intrinsically rewarding, life is justified in the present instead of being held hostage to a hypothetical future gain. Chapter 4. The Conditions of Flow. Flow Activities. We have seen how people describe the common characteristics of optimal experience, a sense that one's skills are adequate to cope with the challenges at hand, in a goal-directed, rule-bound action system that provides clear clues as to how well one is performing. Concentration is so intense that there is no attention left over to think about anything irrelevant or to worry about problems. Self-consciousness disappears and the sense of time becomes distorted. An activity that produces such experiences is so gratifying that people are willing to do it for its own sake, with little concern for what they will get out of it, even when it is difficult or dangerous. But how do such experiences happen? Occasionally, flow may occur by chance because of a fortunate coincidence of external and internal conditions. For instance, friends may be having dinner together and someone brings up a topic that involves everyone in the conversation. One by one, they begin to make jokes and tell stories, and pretty soon all are having fun and feeling good about one another. While such events may happen spontaneously, it is much more likely that flow will result either from a structured activity or from an individual's ability to make flow occur, or both. Why is playing a game enjoyable while the things we have to do every day, like working or sitting at home, are often so boring? And why is it that one person will experience joy even in a concentration camp while another gets the blahs while vacationing at a fancy resort? Answering these questions will make it easier to understand how experience can be shaped to improve the quality of life. When describing optimal experience, we often look to activities like making music, rock climbing, dancing, sailing, or chess. What makes these activities conducive to flow is that they were designed to make optimal experience easier to achieve. They have rules that require the learning of skills, they set up goals, they provide feedback, they make control possible. They facilitate concentration and involvement by making the activity as distinct as possible from the so-called paramount reality of everyday existence. For example, in each sport, participants dress up in eye-catching uniforms and enter special enclaves that set them apart temporarily from ordinary mortals. For the duration of the event, players and spectators cease to act in terms of common sense and concentrate instead on the peculiar reality of the game. Roger Caillois, the French psychological anthropologist, has divided the world's games into 4 broad classes, depending on the kind of experiences they provide. Argon includes games that have competition as their main feature, such as most sports and athletic events. Alea is the class that includes all games of chance, from dice to bingo. Ilinx, or vertigo, is the name he gives to activities that alter consciousness by scrambling ordinary perceptions, such as riding a merry-go-round or skydiving. And mimicry is the group of activities in which alternative realities are created, such as dance, theater, and the arts in general. Using this scheme, it can be said that games offer opportunities to go beyond the boundaries of ordinary experience in 4 different ways. In agonistic games, the participant must stretch her skills to meet the challenge provided by the skills of the opponents. The roots of the word compete are the Latin competire, which meant to seek together. What each person seeks is to actualize her potential, and this task is made easier when others force us to do our best. Aleatory games are enjoyable because they give the illusion of controlling the inscrutable future. Divination is a universal feature of culture, an attempt to break out of the constraints of the present and get a glimpse of what is going to happen. Games of chance draw on the same need. The buffalo ribs become dice, The sticks of the I Ching become playing cards, and the ritual of divination becomes gambling, a secular activity in which people try to outsmart each other or try to outguess fate. Vertigo is the most direct way to alter consciousness. Any activity that transforms the way we perceive reality is enjoyable, a fact that accounts for the attraction of consciousness-expanding drugs of all sorts. But consciousness cannot be expanded. All we can do is shuffle its content, which gives us the impression of having broadened it somehow. The price of most artificially induced alterations, however, is that we lose control over that very consciousness we were supposed to expand. Mimicry makes us feel as though we are more than what we actually are through fantasy, pretense, and disguise. Our ancestors, as they danced wearing the masks of their gods, felt a sense of powerful identification with the forces that ruled the universe. The little girl, playing with her doll and her brother pretending to be a cowboy, also stretched the limits of their ordinary experience, so that they become, temporarily, someone different and more powerful. Every flow activity, whether it involved competition, chance, or any other dimension of experience, has this in common. It provides a sense of discovery, a creative feeling of transporting the person into a new reality. It pushes the person to higher levels of performance and leads to previously undreamed-of states of consciousness. In short, it transforms the self by making it more complex. In this growth of the self lies the key to flow activities. To understand why the complexity of consciousness increases as a result of flow experiences, consider a simple example of a boy. Let's call him Alex, learning to play tennis. We can visualize the experience in terms of two dimensions, challenges and skills. When Alex first starts playing, he has practically no skills, and the only challenge he faces is hitting the ball over the net. This is not a very difficult feat, but Alex is likely to enjoy it because the difficulty is just right for his rudimentary skills. So at this point, he will probably be in flow, but he cannot stay there long. After a while, if he keeps practicing, his skills are bound to improve, and then he will grow bored just batting the ball over the net. Or it might happen that he meets a more practiced opponent, in which case he will realize that there are much harder challenges for him than just lobbing the ball. At that point, he will feel some anxiety concerning his poor performance. Neither boredom nor anxiety are positive experiences, so Alex will be motivated to return to the flow state. How is he to do it? If he is bored and wishes to be in flow again, Alex has essentially only one choice: to increase the challenges he is facing by setting himself a new and more difficult goal that matches his skills. For instance, to beat an opponent just a little more advanced than he is, Alex would be back in flow. If Alex is anxious, the way back to flow requires that he increase his skills. Theoretically, he could also reduce the challenges he is facing, but in practice, it is difficult to ignore challenges once one is aware that they exist. The dynamic feature of this process explains why flow activities lead to growth and discovery. One cannot enjoy doing the same thing at the same level for long. We grow either bored or frustrated, and then the desire to enjoy ourselves again pushes us to stretch our skills or to discover new opportunities for using them. Flow and culture. A major element of the American experiment in democracy has been to make the pursuit of happiness a conscious political goal. Although the Declaration of Independence may have been the first official political document to spell out this goal explicitly, it is probably true that no social system has ever survived long unless its people had some hope that their government would help them achieve happiness. If we assume that the desire to achieve optimal experience is the foremost goal of every human being, each social system can then be evaluated in terms of how much psychic entropy it causes, measuring that disorder not with reference to the ideal order of one or another belief system, but with reference to the goals of the members of that society. A starting point would be to say that one society is better than another if a greater number of its people have access to experiences that are in line with their goals. A second essential criterion would specify that these experiences should lead to the growth of the self on an individual level, by allowing as many people as possible to develop increasingly complex skills. It seems clear that cultures differ from one another in terms of the degree of the pursuit of happiness they make possible. To take a stark example, the culture of the Dobu Islanders was one that encouraged constant fear of sorcery, mistrust among even the closest relatives, and vindictive behavior. Just going to the bathroom was a major problem because it involved stepping out into the bush where everybody expected to be attacked by bad magic when alone among the trees. The Dobuans didn't seem to like these characteristics so pervasive in their everyday experience, but they were unaware of alternatives. They were caught in a web of beliefs and practices that made it very difficult for them to experience psychic harmony. The Ik of Uganda, unable to cope with a deteriorating environment that no longer provides enough food for them to survive, have institutionalized selfishness beyond the wildest dreams of capitalism. The Yanomamo of Venezuela worship violence more than our militaristic superpowers and find nothing as enjoyable as a good bloody raid on a neighboring village. There is no evidence that any of these cultures chose to be selfish, violent, or fearful. Their behavior does not make them happier. On the contrary, it causes suffering. Such practices and beliefs which interfere with happiness are neither inevitable nor necessary. They evolved by chance. But once they become part of the norms and habits of a culture, people assume that this is how things must be. Fortunately, there are also many instances of cultures that, either by luck or by foresight, have succeeded in creating a context in which flow is relatively easy to achieve. The pygmies of the Ituri forest describe a life in harmony with one another and their environment, filling their lives with useful and challenging activities. When they are not hunting or improving their villages, they sing, dance, play musical instruments, or tell stories to each other. Their culture would not be given a high rating in terms of material achievement, but in terms of providing optimal experiences, their way of life seems to be extremely successful. Another good example is the Shuswap tribe of British Columbia. They lived in a region rich in resources, yet the elders said that at times the world became too predictable and the challenge began to go out of life. Without challenge, life had no meaning, so the elders, in their wisdom, would decide that the entire village should move. The entire population would move to a different part of the Shuswap land, and there they found challenge. There were new streams to figure out, new game trails to learn. Now life would regain its meaning and be worth living. Cultures are defensive constructions against chaos, designed to reduce the impact of randomness on experience. They are adaptive responses, just as feathers are for birds and fur is for mammals. In this respect, games provide a compelling analogy to cultures. Both consist of more or less arbitrary goals and rules that allow people to become involved in a process and act with a minimum of doubts and distractions. When a culture succeeds in evolving a set of goals and rules so compelling and so well matched to the skills of the population that its members are able to experience flow with unusual frequency and intensity, we can say that the culture as a whole becomes a great game. The autotelic personality. It is not easy to transform ordinary experience into flow, but almost everyone can improve his or her ability to do so. Some individuals might be constitutionally incapable of experiencing flow. Psychiatrists describe schizophrenics as suffering from anhedonia, which literally means lack of pleasure. This symptom appears to be related to stimulus over-inclusion, which refers to the fact that schizophrenics are condemned to notice irrelevant stimuli, to process information whether they like it or not. Unable to concentrate, attending indiscriminately to everything, patients who suffer from this disease, not surprisingly, end up unable to enjoy themselves. A less drastic obstacle to experiencing flow is excessive self-consciousness. A person who is constantly worried about how others will perceive her, who is afraid of creating the wrong impression, is also condemned to permanent exclusion from enjoyment. So are people who are excessively self-centered. A self-centered individual is usually not self-conscious, but instead evaluates every bit of information only in terms of how it relates to her desires. For such a person, everything is valueless in itself. A flower is not worth a second look unless it can be used. A man or a woman who cannot advance one's interests does not deserve further attention. Attentional disorders and stimulus over-inclusion prevent flow because psychic energy is too fluid and erratic. Excessive self-consciousness and self-centeredness prevent it for the opposite reason. Attention is too rigid and tight. Neither extreme allows a person to control attention. Those who operate at these extremes cannot enjoy themselves, have a difficult time learning, and forfeit opportunities for the growth of the self. A neurological advantage in processing information may not be the only key to explaining why some people have a good time waiting at a bus station, while others are bored, no matter how entertaining their environment is. Early childhood influences are also very likely factors. There is ample evidence to suggest that how parents interact with a child will have a lasting effect on the kind of person that child grows up to be. Family contexts promoting optimal experience tend to have 5 characteristics. The first is clarity. The teenagers feel that they know what their parents expect from them. Goals and feedback in the family interaction are unambiguous. The second is centering, or the children's perception that their parents are interested in what they are doing in the present, in their concrete feelings and experiences, rather than being preoccupied with whether they will be getting into a good college or obtaining a well-paying job. Next is the issue of choice. Children feel that they have a variety of possibilities from which to choose, including that of breaking parental rules, as long as they are prepared to face the consequences. The fourth characteristic is commitment, or the trust that allows the child to feel comfortable enough to set aside the shield of his defenses and become unself-consciously involved in whatever he is interested in. And finally, there is challenge, or the parent's dedication to provide increasingly complex opportunities for action to their children. The presence of these 5 conditions makes possible what is called the autotelic family context because they provide an ideal training for enjoying life. Children who grow up in family situations that facilitate clarity of goals, feedback, feeling of control, concentration on the task at hand, intrinsic motivation, and challenge will generally have a better chance to order their lives so as to make flow possible. The people of flow. The traits that mark an autotelic personality are most clearly revealed by people who seem to enjoy situations that ordinary persons would find unbearable. Lost in Antarctica or confined to a prison cell, some individuals succeed in transforming their harrowing conditions into a manageable and even enjoyable struggle, whereas most others would succumb to the ordeal. Richard Logan, who has studied the accounts of many people in difficult situations, concludes that they survived by finding ways to turn the bleak objective conditions into subjectively controllable experience. They followed the blueprint of flow activities. First, they paid close attention to the most minute details of their environment, discovering in it hidden opportunities for action that matched what little they were capable of doing. Then they set goals appropriate to their precarious situation and closely monitored progress through the feedback they received. Whenever they reached their goal, they upped the ante, setting increasingly complex challenges for themselves. Christopher Burney, a prisoner of the Nazis who had spent a long time in solitary confinement during World War II, gives a fairly typical example of this process. If the reach of experience is suddenly confined, he notes, we are apt to take the few objects that offer themselves and ask a whole catalogue of often absurd questions about them. My bed, for example, could be measured and roughly classified with school beds or army beds. When I had done with the bed, which was too simple to intrigue me long, I felt the blankets, estimated their warmth, examined the precise mechanics of the window, the discomfort of the toilet, computed the length and breadth, the orientation and elevation of the cell. Essentially, the same ingenuity in finding opportunities for mental action and setting goals is reported by survivors of any solitary confinement. Eva Zeisel, the ceramic designer who was imprisoned in Moscow's Lubyanka prison for over a year by Stalin's police, kept her sanity by figuring out how she would make a bra out of materials at hand, playing chess against herself in her head, holding imaginary conversations in French, doing gymnastics, and memorizing poems she composed. Alexander Solzhenitsyn describes how one of his fellow prisoners in the Lefortovo jail mapped the world on the floor of the cell, and then imagined himself traveling across Asia and Europe to America, covering a few kilometers each day. When adversity threatens to paralyze us, we need to reassert control by finding a new direction in which to invest psychic energy, a direction that lies outside the reach of external forces. When every aspiration is frustrated, a person still must seek a meaningful goal around which to organize the self. Then, even though that person is objectively a slave, subjectively he is free. Solzhenitsyn describes very well how even the most degrading situation can be transformed into a flow experience. Sometimes, when standing in a column of dejected prisoners, amidst the shouts of guards with machine guns, I felt such a rush of rhymes and images that I seemed to be wafted overhead. At such moments I was both free and happy. Some prisoners tried to escape by smashing through the barbed wire. For me, there was no barbed wire. The head count of prisoners remained unchanged, but I was actually away on a distant flight. But what makes some people able to achieve this internal control while most others are swept away by external hardships? The most important trait of survivors is a non-self-conscious individualism, or a strongly directed purpose that is not self-seeking. People who have that quality are bent on doing their best in all circumstances, yet they are not concerned primarily with advancing their own interests. Because they are intrinsically motivated in their actions, they are not easily disturbed by external threats. With enough psychic energy free to observe and analyze their surroundings objectively, they have a better chance of discovering in them new opportunities for action. Narcissistic individuals, who are mainly concerned with protecting their self, fall apart when the external conditions turn threatening. The ensuing panic prevents them from doing what they must do. Their attention turns inward in an effort to restore order in consciousness, and not enough remains to negotiate outside reality. Without interest in the world, a desire to be actively related to it, a person becomes isolated into himself. Bertrand Russell, one of the greatest philosophers of our century, described how he achieved personal happiness. Gradually, I learned to be indifferent to myself and my deficiencies. I came to center my attention increasingly upon external objects, the state of the world, various branches of knowledge, individuals for whom I felt affection. There could be no better short description of how to build for oneself an autotelic personality. Chapter 5. The Body in Flow. A man possesses nothing certainly save a brief loan of his own body, wrote James Branch Cabell, yet the body of man is capable of much curious pleasure. When we find ourselves unhappy, depressed, or bored, we have an easy remedy at hand: to use the body for all it is worth. Most people nowadays are acutely aware of the importance of health and physical fitness, yet the almost unlimited potential for enjoyment that the body offers often remains unexploited. Few learn to move with the grace of an acrobat, see with the fresh eye of an artist, feel the joy of an athlete breaking his own record, taste with the subtlety of a connoisseur, or love with a skill that lifts sex into the realm of art. Because these opportunities are easily within reach, the simplest step toward improving the quality of life consists in learning to control the body and its senses. Everything the body can do is potentially enjoyable. Yet many ignore this capacity, using their physical equipment as little as possible, leaving its ability to provide flow dormant. When left undeveloped, the senses provide us with chaotic information. An untrained body moves in random, clumsy ways. An insensitive eye perceives only ugly or uninteresting sights. The unmusical ear hears mainly jarring noises. The coarse palate knows only insipid tastes. If the functions of the body are allowed to atrophy, the quality of life becomes merely adequate, and for some, even dismal. But if one takes control of what the body can do and learns to impose order on physical sensations, entropy yields to a sense of enjoyable harmony in consciousness. Higher, faster, stronger. The Latin motto of the modern Olympic Games, Altius, Citius, Fortius, provides a good, if incomplete, summary of how the body can experience flow. It encompasses the rationale of all sports, which is to do something better than it has ever been done before. The purest form of athletics is to break through the limitations of what the body can accomplish. However unimportant an athletic goal may appear to the outsider, it becomes a serious affair when performed with the intent of demonstrating a perfection of skill. Throwing things, for instance, is a rather trivial ability. Even small babies are quite good at it. But how far a person can throw an object of a certain weight becomes a matter of legend. Flow experiences based on the use of physical skills do not occur only in the context of outstanding athletic feats. Olympians do not possess an exclusive gift for finding enjoyment in pushing performance beyond existing boundaries. Every person, no matter how unfit, can rise a little higher, go a little faster, and grow to be a little stronger. The joy of surpassing the limits of the body is open to all. Even the simplest physical act becomes enjoyable when it is transformed to produce flow. The essential steps in this process are to set an overall goal and as many sub-goals as are realistically feasible, to find ways of measuring progress in terms of the goals chosen, to keep concentrating on what one is doing and to keep making finer and finer distinctions in the challenges involved, to develop the skills necessary to interact with the opportunities available, and to keep raising the stakes if the activity becomes boring. A good example of this method is the act of walking. It is the most trivial physical activity imaginable, yet it can be profoundly enjoyable if a person sets goals and takes control of the process. For the hiker, the activity can become a complex flow activity, almost an art form. On a difficult trail, an experienced hiker walks with economy of motion and lightness, constantly adjusting her steps to the terrain in a highly sophisticated process of selecting the best solution to a changing series of equations involving mass, velocity, and friction. In the city, where the terrain is predictable, the walker can focus on the social stimulation of crowds, historical architecture, or the patterns of human interaction. Unless one sets goals and develops skills, walking is merely featureless drudgery. With them, it becomes a source of complex feedback that provides optimal experience. The joys of movement. Sports and fitness are not the only media of physical experience that use the body as a source of enjoyment. A broad range of activities rely on rhythmic or harmonious movements to generate flow. Among these, dance is probably the oldest and the most significant, both for its universal appeal and for its potential complexity. From the most isolated tribes to the polished troupes of the ballet, the response of the body to music is widely practiced as a way of improving the quality of experience. The enjoyment of dancing is often so intense that people will give up many other options for its sake. It allows for a physical high, a state where one floats along, having fun, feeling the self move around, expressing oneself in terms of motion. It is a body language, a communicative medium where one expresses oneself well in terms of the music and the people present. But one need not become a professional to enjoy controlling the expressive potentials of the body. Dilettante dancers can have just as much fun without sacrificing every other goal for the sake of feeling themselves move harmoniously. There are other forms of expression that use the body as an instrument, miming and acting, for instance. The popularity of charades as a parlor game is due to the fact that it allows people to shed their customary identity for a time and act out different roles. Even the most silly and clumsy impersonation can provide an enjoyable relief from the limitations of everyday patterns of behavior, offering a glimpse into alternative modes of being. Sex as flow. When people think of enjoyment, one of the first things that comes to mind is sex. This is not surprising, for sexuality is one of the most universally rewarding experiences, surpassed in its power to motivate perhaps only by the need to survive. The urge to have sex is so powerful that it can drain psychic energy away from other necessary goals. Therefore, every culture invests great efforts in restraining and rechanneling it. But is sex always enjoyable? The answer depends on what happens in the consciousness of those involved. The same sexual act can be experienced as painful, revolting, frightening, neutral, pleasant, pleasurable, enjoyable, or ecstatic, depending on how it is linked to a person's goals. To take pleasure in sex, one needs only to be healthy and willing. No special skills are required, and soon after the first experiences, few new physical challenges arise. Like other pleasures, unless it is transformed into an enjoyable activity, sex easily becomes boring with time. It turns from a genuinely positive experience into either a meaningless ritual or an addictive dependence. Fortunately, there are many ways to make sex enjoyable. Eroticism is one form of cultivating sexuality that focuses on the development of physical skills. Romance provides an entire new range of challenges to lovers. For those who learn the skills necessary to meet them, it becomes not only pleasurable, but enjoyable as well. A third dimension of sexuality emerges when, in addition to physical pleasure and the enjoyment of the courtship game, the partners focus on their relationship as a goal in itself. To keep love fresh, the relationship must become more complex. The partners must discover new potentialities in themselves and in each other. This is a lifetime's task, investing attention in each other to learn what thoughts, feelings, and dreams reside in the partner's mind. The ultimate control, yoga and the martial arts. When it comes to learning to control the body and its experiences, the West is as a child compared to the great Eastern civilizations. Of the great Eastern methods for training the body, one of the oldest and most diffuse is Hatha Yoga. In Sanskrit, yoga means yoking, referring to the method's goal of joining the individual with God, first by uniting the various parts of the body with one another, then making the body as a whole work together with consciousness. To achieve this aim, yoga prescribes 8 stages of increasing skill. The first 2, yama, restraint, and niyama, obedience, involve ethical preparation to straighten out consciousness and reduce psychic entropy. The next 2 stages involve physical preparation, asana, posture, and pranayama, breath control, enabling the practitioner to overcome the demands of the senses. The 5th stage, pratyahara, withdrawal, involves learning to withdraw attention from outward objects. The final 3 stages, dharana, holding on, dhyana, intense meditation, and samadhi, self-collectedness, involve the control of consciousness through purely mental operations. The similarities between yoga and flow are extremely strong. It makes sense to think of yoga as a very thoroughly planned flow activity. Both try to achieve a joyous, self-forgetful involvement through concentration, made possible by discipline of the body. Another set of Eastern disciplines, the martial arts, also emphasize consciousness-controlling skills. Whether it is judo, karate, or tai chi, the warrior strives to reach a point where he can act with lightning speed without conscious thought. Those who perform well claim that fighting becomes a joyous, artistic performance, where the duality between mind and body is transformed into a harmonious one-pointedness of mind. Flow through the senses, the joys of seeing. It is easy to accept that sports, sex, and yoga can be enjoyable, but few people step beyond these to explore the capacities of the other organs. Seeing, for instance, is often used simply as a distant sensing system to avoid obstacles. Yet visual skills can provide constant access to enjoyable experiences. The visual arts are one of the best training grounds for developing these skills. To really see, one must invest psychic energy. A viewer might describe the aesthetic flow experience as a sudden epiphany of order, a realization of a scheme where things come together. It can be a visceral reaction, a thrill in all senses. Not only great works of art produce this. For the trained eye, even the most mundane sights, a roofscape, a cloud reflected in a high-rise, can be delightful. Without cultivating the necessary skills, one cannot expect to take true enjoyment in a pursuit. Seeing is immediately accessible, and it is a pity to let it rest undeveloped. The flow of music. In every known culture, the ordering of sound has been used to improve the quality of life. One of the most ancient functions of music is to focus the listener's attention on patterns appropriate to a desired mood. Music for dancing, for mourning, for romance, for marching. Music, which is organized auditory information, helps organize the mind that attends to it, reducing psychic entropy. Listening to music wards off boredom and anxiety, and when seriously attended to, it can induce flow experiences. However, the easy availability of recorded music today can be a mixed blessing. If one listens simply to keep the mind from wandering, it remains a passive, low-level pleasure. To turn it into flow, one must actively listen, perhaps by analyzing the structure of the piece, comparing different performances, or understanding the cultural context. The sensory delight of absolute sound, the analytic understanding of structure, and the emotional resonance all contribute to the complexity of the musical experience. The joys of tasting. What love is to the heart, appetite is to the stomach, wrote Rossini. Eating, like sex, is a basic pleasure built into our nervous system. But in every culture, the simple process of ingesting calories has been transformed into an art form. By paying attention to the properties of foodstuffs and experimenting with combinations, humans developed cuisines, rules that provide an almost infinite range of flow experiences. To transform the biological necessity of feeding into a flow experience, one must begin by paying attention to what one eats. Developing a discriminating palate requires the investment of psychic energy, but the return is a more complex experience. This does not mean one must eat only gourmet food. A cultivated palate provides opportunities for flow if one approaches eating and cooking in a spirit of adventure and curiosity. The danger, as with other pleasures, is addiction, gluttony. But only through freely chosen discipline can life be enjoyed and kept within the bounds of reason. Chapter 6. The Flow of Thought. The good things in life do not come only through the senses. Some of the most exhilarating experiences we undergo are generated inside the mind, triggered by information that challenges our ability to think rather than by the use of sensory skills. As Sir Francis Bacon noted almost 400 years ago, wonder, which is the seed of knowledge, is the reflection of the purest form of pleasure. Just as there are flow activities corresponding to every physical potential of the body, every mental operation is able to provide its own particular form of enjoyment. Making a distinction between flow activities that involve functions of the body and those that involve the mind is to some extent spurious, for all physical activities must involve a mental component if they are to be enjoyable. However, it does make sense to differentiate a class of activities that are enjoyable because they order the mind directly, rather than through the mediation of bodily feelings. These activities are primarily symbolic in nature, depending on natural languages, mathematics, or other abstract notation systems to achieve their ordering effects. To enjoy a mental activity, one must meet the same conditions that make physical activities enjoyable. There must be skill in a symbolic domain. There have to be rules, a goal, and a way of obtaining feedback. The mother of science. The Greeks personified memory as the Lady Mnemosyne. Mother of the 9 muses, she was believed to have given birth to all the arts and sciences. It is valid to consider memory the oldest mental skill from which all others derive, for if we weren't able to remember, we couldn't follow the rules of arithmetic, or speak a sentence, or compose a song. Before written notation systems were developed, all information had to be stored in the memory. To ensure that it wouldn't be lost, it was encoded in the cadence of poetry so that the rhythm would help retrieval. The most natural way to use the memory is to focus on the intense order it can bring to the mind. A person who can remember stories, poems, lyrics of songs, or baseball statistics can always amuse himself and others. But even more importantly, having a well-stocked memory allows one to be independent of the external environment. A person who carries a rich universe of information within his mind is never truly alone, never truly bored. He can retreat into the secret rooms of his own mind and rearrange the furniture of his memories, finding new connections and fresh insights. In the modern world, we have largely delegated the function of memory to external devices, books, computers, databases. While this frees us from the burden of rote memorization, it also leaves our minds empty of the raw materials of thought. To reclaim the power of mnemosony is to reclaim a fundamental control over the content of our consciousness. The rules of the games of the mind. Besides stories and riddles, all civilizations gradually developed more systematic rules for combining information in the form of geometric representations and formal proofs. With the help of such formulas, it became possible to describe the movement of the stars, predict seasonal cycles, and accurately map the Earth. Abstract knowledge, and finally what we know as experimental science, grew out of these rules. It is important to stress a fact that is all too often lost sight of. Philosophy and science were invented and flourished because thinking is pleasurable. If thinkers did not enjoy the sense of order that the use of syllogisms and numbers creates in consciousness, it is very unlikely that we would now have the disciplines of mathematics and physics. Great thinkers have always been motivated by the enjoyment of thinking rather than by the material rewards that could be gained by it. Democritus, one of the founders of the atomic theory, was so revered by his countrymen that they considered him a bit mad. Watching him sit for days immersed in thought, they assumed he was acting unnaturally, but he was simply lost in the flow of thought. "It is godlike ever to think on something beautiful and on something new," he wrote. "I would rather discover one true cause than gain the kingdom of Persia." The tools that make the flow of thought possible are common property. A person who becomes familiar with the conventions of poetry or the rules of calculus can subsequently grow independent of external stimulation. She can generate ordered trains of thought regardless of what is happening in external reality. The play of words. Language is the most universal tool of the mind, and its potential for providing enjoyment is nearly infinite. We use words not just to communicate information, but to play. The most common form of this play is conversation. In its highest form, conversation is a bridge upon which we cross into the mind of another, a dance of ideas where the goal is not to win an argument, but to explore the world together. Beyond conversation, there are the more structured word games, crossword puzzles, Scrabble, and the like. But the most profound play of words is found in the art of literature. Writing is a disciplined means of expression that allows one to record events and feelings, to analyze them, and to give them a permanent form. It is a way to create order out of the chaos of experience. Writing gives the mind a disciplined means of expression. It allows one to record events and experiences so that they can be easily recalled and relived in the future. It is a way to analyze and understand experiences, a self-communication that brings order to them. Poetry in particular, with its strict rules of meter and rhyme, acts as a powerful container for emotion. The poet invests psychic energy into finding the perfect word, the perfect rhythm to encapsulate a feeling. In doing so, he not only communicates that feeling to others, but also resolves it within himself. Writing that becomes addictive can be dangerous, forcing the writer to live in a world of words rather than reality. But when used to control experience, it is a tool of infinite subtlety. Befriending Clio. As memory was the mother of culture, Clio, the proclaimer, was her eldest daughter. In Greek mythology, she was the patroness of history, responsible for keeping orderly accounts of past events. Although history lacks the clear rules that make other mental activities like logic or mathematics so enjoyable, it has its own unambiguous structure established by the irreversible sequence of events in time. Observing, recording, and preserving the memory of both the large and small events of life is one of the oldest and most satisfying ways to bring order to consciousness. In a sense, every individual is a historian of his or her own personal existence. Having a record of the past can make a great contribution to the quality of life. It frees us from the tyranny of the present and makes it possible for consciousness to revisit the times when we were successful, happy, or loved. One can practice history as a flow activity on many levels. The most personal involves simply keeping a journal. The next is to write a family chronicle, going as far into the past as possible. Some people expand their interest to their ethnic group or community. Knowledge that is seen to be controlled from the outside is acquired with reluctance, but as soon as a person decides which aspects of the past are compelling and decides to pursue them, learning history can become a full-fledged flow experience. The delights of science. It might seem barely plausible that a layperson could become an amateur scientist. We are told that science is now the domain of professionals, requiring huge budgets and laboratories. But this view ignores the fact that for centuries, great scientists did their work as a hobby, driven by fascination rather than funding. Nicholas Copernicus perfected his description of planetary motions while he was a canon at a cathedral. Gregor Mendel's genetics were the result of a gardening hobby. The mental framework that makes science enjoyable is accessible to everyone. It involves curiosity, careful observation, a disciplined way of recording events, and finding ways to tease out the underlying regularities in what one learns. There are amateur astronomers building their own telescopes, closet geologists scouring the wilderness, and cactus collectors roaming the desert. What keeps many from developing these skills is the belief that they must compete with professionals. But the point of amateur science is not to win a Nobel Prize. It is to bring order to the mind of the seeker. If flow is the measure, science can contribute immensely to the quality of life. Loving wisdom. Philosophy used to mean love of wisdom, and people devoted their lives to it for that reason. Today, professional philosophy has become a specialized academic discipline, often removed from the concerns of daily life. Amateur philosophers, however, need not worry about the politics of journals or the jealousies of scholars. They can keep their minds on the basic questions. What is reality? What is the good life? What is beautiful? To be an amateur philosopher is to take control of one's own worldview. It requires reading what others have thought, but more importantly, it requires the courage to think for oneself. It involves the struggle to express clearly the major questions by which one feels confronted, and to sketch out answers that make sense of one's experience. When a person learns to derive enjoyment from this difficult task, they have found a way to maintain order in consciousness even when the external world is in chaos. Amateurs and professionals. Some individuals prefer to specialize and devote all their energy to one activity, aiming to reach professional levels of performance. They tend to look down on the dilettante who dabbles in many fields without mastering any. But the original meaning of amateur is one who loves what he does, from the Latin amare, to love, and dilettante comes from delectere, to take delight in. The bad connotations these terms have earned are due to the blurring of the distinction between intrinsic and extrinsic goals. An amateur who pretends to know as much as a professional is probably up to mischief. But the point of becoming an amateur scientist or philosopher is not to compete with professionals on their own turf, but to use a symbolic discipline to extend mental skills and create order in consciousness. On that level, amateur scholarship can be even more effective than its professional counterpart. But the moment amateurs use knowledge mainly to bolster their egos or achieve material advantage, they become caricatures. The challenge of lifelong learning. The aim of this chapter has been to review the ways in which mental activity can produce enjoyment. The mind offers at least as many opportunities for action as does the body. Just as the use of the limbs and senses is available to everyone, so too are the uses of memory, language, logic, and the rules of causation. Many people give up on learning after they leave school because education was a source of extrinsic pressure. They count graduation as the first day of freedom. But a person who forgoes the use of his symbolic skills is never really free. His thinking will be directed by the opinions of his neighbors, the editorials in the papers, and the appeals of television. He will be at the mercy of experts. Ideally, the end of extrinsically applied education should be the start of an education that is motivated intrinsically. At that point, the goal of studying is no longer to make the grade or earn a diploma, but to understand what is happening around one, to develop a personally meaningful sense of what one's experience is all about. From that will come the profound joy of the thinker, the person who has discovered the flow of the mind. Chapter 7. Work as Flow. Autotelic workers. For the vast majority of human existence, the separation between work and life did not exist. A hunter did not punch a clock. A weaver did not wait for the weekend to begin living. Their productive activities were seamlessly woven into the fabric of their daily existence, indistinguishable from their social and spiritual lives. Today, however, we have carved a deep chasm between what we do to earn a living and what we do to enjoy ourselves. Sigmund Freud was right when he asserted that love and work are the two cornerstones of human happiness. Yet, while we obsess over the former, we often view the latter as a necessary evil, a burden to be endured until we can escape into the freedom of leisure. This negative view of work is a tragedy, considering that we spend roughly half of our waking lives engaged in it. If we cannot find meaningful engagement in our careers, we effectively write off 50% of our existence. Fortunately, this is not an inevitability. There are individuals who demonstrate that even the most repetitive or seemingly mundane tasks can be transformed into sources of profound satisfaction. These are the autotelic workers, men and women who possess the internal ability to create flow where none seems to exist. Consider the case of a welder in a railroad car plant, a man who, by all external metrics, held a grueling and monotonous job. Yet he was the most vital figure in the factory. While his colleagues grew bored and resentful, he moved with the grace of a surgeon, finding endless fascination in the behavior of metal under heat. He refused a promotion to foreman because it would have taken him away from the game he had created. For him, every weld was a challenge to be executed with greater precision and efficiency than the last. He did not rely on the company to provide satisfaction. He generated it himself by restructuring his environment into a complex activity with its own goals and rewards. He transformed a job into a calling, not by changing the work, but by changing his relationship to it. This ability to find enjoyment is not reserved for the highly educated or the artistically inclined. It is found in peasant farmers who know every blade of grass in their fields, and in short-order cooks who turn the lunch rush into a choreographed performance of speed and memory. These individuals share a common trait. They do not see their work as an imposition from the outside, but as an arena for the exercise of their own skills and the expression of their own excellence. They dissolve the boundary between work and play. Autotelic jobs. While the internal attitude of the worker is paramount, the structure of the work itself plays a significant role. Some occupations are inherently more conducive to flow because they resemble the structure of games. They offer variety, a sense of autonomy, clear goals, and immediate feedback. A surgeon cutting into tissue knows instantly if the incision is correct. A hunter tracking game receives constant feedback from the environment. These autotelic jobs naturally engage the mind and body, making it easier to enter a state of deep concentration. In contrast, the Industrial Revolution introduced a form of labor designed to strip away these very elements. The assembly line reduces a human being to a mechanical component, repeating a single fragmented motion without understanding the whole product. In such environments, goals are obscure, feedback is delayed or punitive, and autonomy is non-existent. It is no wonder that psychic entropy, boredom, apathy, and resentment flourishes in these settings. However, even in the modern information economy, we face similar challenges. A manager who spends days in vague meetings without clear objectives, or a data entry clerk who never sees the result of their keystrokes, suffers from the same lack of structure. To improve the quality of working life, we must redesign jobs to align closer to the flow model. This means granting workers more control over their tasks, providing clearer metrics of success, and ensuring that the difficulty of the work scales with the employee's growing skills. When a job is designed to resemble a flow activity, work ceases to be a burden and becomes a vehicle for personal growth. The paradox of work. One of the most startling findings to emerge from our research is a phenomenon we call the paradox of work. When we used the experience sampling method to track people's emotional states throughout the day, the results contradicted popular wisdom. We found that people reported experiencing flow, high concentration, high challenge, and high skill usage, much more frequently while at work than during their leisure time. At work, they felt strong, creative, and active. In contrast, at home, they often reported feeling passive, weak, and dull. Yet, when asked a simple question while at work, "Would you rather be doing something else?" the answer was almost overwhelmingly yes. Conversely, when at home, despite the lower quality of their experience, they claimed they wanted to be there. This reveals a deep disconnect between the reality of our experience and our cultural programming. We are conditioned to believe that work is an imposition, a restriction on our freedom, and that real life happens only when we are off the clock. Consequently, we ignore the immediate evidence of our senses, that we are actually enjoying the challenge of our jobs, and instead interpret our state through the lens of a cultural stereotype. We yearn for leisure, but when we get it, we often fail to enjoy it. We essentially dismiss the satisfaction we feel at work because it doesn't fit the narrative of what happiness is supposed to look like. This suppression of the truth leads to a life of dissatisfaction, where we hate the activity that makes us feel most alive and idolize the time that makes us feel apathetic. The waste of free time. The irony of the modern condition is that we work tirelessly to gain free time, yet when we finally possess it, we do not know how to use it. Leisure is not automatically a source of happiness. It is merely a vacuum of time that must be filled. If we do not have the skills to structure this time effectively, entropy inevitably sets in. The mind, left to its own devices without a clear focus, tends to drift toward worry, anxiety, or depression. To avoid this psychic chaos, the majority of people turn to the most accessible pacifiers: passive entertainment. Television, and now digital media, serves as a way to structure attention with minimal effort. It provides a semblance of order, a plot to follow, images to watch, without demanding any engagement of skill or will. But this is a hollow victory. While it keeps chaos at bay, it does not produce flow. It leaves the self unchanged, neither more complex nor more confident. The profound truth is that leisure requires as much discipline and energy as work to be truly rewarding. The autotelic person treats their free time with the same seriousness as a craftsman treats their trade. They do not merely kill time, they invest it in hobbies, arts, sports, or learning, activities that demand focus and provide the deep enjoyment of mastery. To waste free time in passivity is to waste the very opportunity for freedom we worked so hard to earn. As the saying goes, leisure is dangerous for the ignorant, for without the internal resources to order one's consciousness, freedom becomes nothing more than a void. Chapter 8. Enjoying Solitude and Other People. The conflict between being alone and being with others. Hell is other people, wrote Jean-Paul Sartre, capturing a sentiment many of us feel after a long day of demanding social obligations. Yet, the same philosopher also noted that to be is to be related. This contradiction lies at the heart of the human condition. We are social animals, biologically wired to seek connection, yet we also cherish our individuality and crave the freedom of solitude. Relationships are the source of our greatest joys and our deepest pains. When we are with others, we must constantly adjust our behavior to their expectations. This requires attention, psychic energy, that could be used for our own purposes. Social interaction demands compromise. It restricts our autonomy. Every conversation is a negotiation of reality, a subtle power struggle over whose definition of the situation will prevail. On the other hand, solitude offers total freedom. In our own company, we can do as we please, think what we wish, and follow our own rhythms. But this freedom comes at a price. Without the structure provided by others, the feedback, the validation, the shared goals, consciousness can easily become disorganized. The mind, lacking an external focus, turns inward and often finds only chaos. We may call it freedom, but for many, solitude feels more like a vacuum. The challenge, then, is to find a balance. We must learn to tolerate and even enjoy solitude, using it to build a complex self that is not dependent on others for order. Simultaneously, we must learn to interact with others not as a burden, but as a source of flow, creating relationships that are mutually enriching rather than draining. The pain of loneliness. Why is solitude so difficult to bear? The answer lies in the nature of consciousness. As we have seen, the mind has a natural tendency toward entropy. When there is nothing to do, no task to focus on, and no other person to interact with, thoughts begin to wander. And they usually wander to the most pressing unresolved problems: health worries, financial concerns, relationship troubles. To avoid this painful state, most people desperately seek distraction. They turn on the television, pick up a book they don't really want to read, or call a friend just to kill time. These activities are not chosen for their intrinsic value, but simply to keep the mind occupied and prevent the demons of chaos from entering. This is why solitary confinement is such a severe punishment. It strips away all external distractions, forcing the prisoner to confront the content of their own mind. For those without a rich inner life, this can lead to madness. Loneliness is not just about being alone, it is the subjective experience of isolation. One can be lonely in a crowd if one feels disconnected. Conversely, a hermit may never feel lonely if he feels a connection to God or nature. The pain of loneliness is a signal that our psychic energy is not being invested in a meaningful way. It is a warning that our self is in danger of disintegration. Taming solitude. The ability to enjoy solitude is a hallmark of a mature and complex personality. It means having the internal resources to structure one's own attention. The person who can be alone without being bored or anxious is free. They are not dependent on external props or other people to feel alive. This capacity is often developed in childhood. Children who are allowed to play alone, to invent their own games and stories, learn early on how to control their own experience. They discover that they can be the authors of their own entertainment. In contrast, children who are constantly entertained by parents or television never learn this skill. As adults, they may feel a constant gnawing emptiness whenever they are not being stimulated from the outside. Taming solitude involves transforming it into a flow experience. It means setting goals for one's time alone, whether it be reading, writing, gardening, or simply thinking through a problem. It requires the same discipline as work or a hobby. When we approach solitude with active intent rather than passive resignation, it becomes a time of renewal and growth. We can use it to explore parts of ourselves that are suppressed in social situations, to consolidate our memories, and to plan our future. Creative individuals almost universally value solitude. It is in the quiet moments of aloneness that the mind can make the unexpected connections that lead to innovation. But one does not have to be a genius to benefit. Anyone can learn to use solitude to reorder their consciousness. The key is to view it not as a void to be filled, but as a space to be cultivated. Flow and the family is a word that evokes warm images of Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings. But the reality is often quite different. For many, the family is a source of boredom, conflict, or indifference. We often take our family members for granted, assuming that because we are related, we don't need to put effort into the relationship. This is a fatal mistake. A family, like any other joint enterprise, requires the investment of psychic energy to function well. If it is left to run on automatic pilot, entropy will set in, arguments will erupt, misunderstandings will fester, and members will drift apart, seeking enjoyment elsewhere. To transform family life into a flow activity, we must apply the same principles we use in other areas. First, there must be a clear goal. What is the family trying to achieve? Is it merely survival, or is it the mutual growth and happiness of its members? Second, there must be feedback. Are we communicating? Do we know how others are feeling? Third, there must be a balance between challenges and skills. A marriage that was exciting in the beginning can become boring if the partners do not grow together, finding new ways to interact and new goals to pursue. Differentiation and integration are crucial here. Each family member must be encouraged to develop their own unique self, differentiation, to pursue their own interests and talents. At the same time, the family must be united by shared goals and activities, integration. A family that is all differentiation becomes a group of strangers living under one roof. A family that is all integration becomes stifling and conformist. The optimal family provides a context where each person can be themselves while also feeling part of a larger whole. This requires work. It means turning off the TV and talking. It means planning activities that everyone can enjoy. Not just the lowest common denominator entertainment, but challenges that stretch everyone. It means listening, really listening to what a spouse or child is saying. It is not easy, but the reward is a source of strength and satisfaction that provides a secure base for exploring the world. Enjoying friends. Friendship is often more conducive to flow than family life because it is chosen. We choose our friends because we share interests and values with them. We are not bound to them by legal or biological ties, but by the mutual enjoyment of each other's company. However, even friendships can become stagnant. We all know the habitual friendship, the weekly poker game or lunch date that has become a rigid ritual, devoid of any real spark. To keep friendship alive, we must introduce complexity. We must find new things to do together, new topics to discuss, new ways to challenge each other. Friendships serve two main purposes. The first is instrumental. Friends help us achieve our goals. They provide support, advice, and connections. The second is expressive. Friends are an end in themselves. We enjoy them for who they are, for the emotional resonance we feel when we are with them. The best friendships combine both. They are relationships where we can be ourselves, let down our guard, and yet also be challenged to grow. A true friend is someone who pays attention to us, who validates ourselves, but who also pushes us to be better. In the mirror of a friend's eyes, we see a reflection of ourselves that helps us understand who we are. The wider community beyond the intimate circle of family and friends lies the wider community, the neighborhood, the city, the nation, humanity itself. For many, this is a distant abstraction, but for those who seek to build a complex self, engagement with the community offers a vast arena for flow. Politics, in the broad sense of the affairs of the city, can be a source of deep satisfaction. It involves working with others toward a common goal, negotiating differences, and trying to shape the future. It provides challenges that are far greater than any individual could tackle alone. Volunteering, activism, and civic participation are not just good deeds. They are opportunities for optimal experience. They allow us to transcend the boundaries of the ego and connect with something larger. They provide a sense of purpose and meaning that personal success alone cannot supply. However, there is a danger here as well. One can become so immersed in a cause that one loses one's individuality. The true believer, who sacrifices everything for a political or religious dogma, has achieved integration, but at the cost of differentiation. The goal is to be a unique individual who chooses to participate in the community, not a cog in a machine. Ultimately, the quality of our relationships determines the quality of our lives. We are social beings, and we cannot find happiness in isolation. By transforming our interactions with others into flow experiences, by investing energy, setting goals, and seeking complexity, we can turn the potential hell of other people into a source of enduring joy. Chapter 9. Cheating, Chaos, Tragedies, Transformed. The path to an optimal life is rarely a straight sunlit road. Even the most fortunate among us will eventually encounter the shadows of illness, financial ruin, or the loss of loved ones. These events are not merely interruptions. They are fundamental threats to the order of the self. When chaos strikes, it strikes at our very identity, threatening to dismantle the goals and beliefs that hold our consciousness together. There are two primary ways the human mind responds to such trauma. The first is disintegration. The energy required to defend the self against the threat becomes so great that none remains for growth or engagement with the world. The person withdraws, becoming rigid, fearful, and defensive. The second response is transformation. In this scenario, the individual acknowledges the threat but refuses to let it define them. Instead of being crushed by the chaos, they use it as a catalyst to build a new, more complex self. History and psychology are replete with examples of this second path. We see it in the politician who, blinded by an accident, develops a visionary inner sight, in the artist who, having lost their hearing, learns to listen to the vibrations of the earth. These individuals do not merely bounce back to who they were before, they become something new, something stronger. They possess the uncanny ability to turn entropy into flow. They treat the tragedy not as a final verdict, but as a new set of constraints within which they must now operate. By setting new goals that are appropriate to their altered reality, they re-engage with life, often finding a depth of meaning that was inaccessible to them in their previous, more comfortable existence. Coping with stress. Why do some people crumble under pressure while others thrive? The difference often lies in how they process information. The ability to cope with stress, often termed resilience or hardiness, is not a magical trait, but a specific way of organizing attention. This ability rests on three main pillars. The first is unself-conscious self-assurance. This is not arrogance, but a deep-seated belief that one's destiny is in one's own hands. It is the quiet confidence of the pilot who respects the storm but trusts his skill to navigate it. This person does not waste energy worrying about the outcome or fearing for their ego. They focus entirely on the immediate actions required to survive. The second pillar is the focus of attention outward. When disaster looms, the natural instinct is to turn inward, to obsess over one's pain and fear. But the resilient individual does the opposite. They stay connected to the environment, scanning for information, looking for opportunities. They know that the solution to their problem lies not in their own head, but in the world around them. By maintaining an objective focus, they prevent themselves from being isolated by their suffering. The third pillar is the discovery of new solutions. Resilience is not just about endurance, it is about creativity. When the old roads are blocked, the hardy person cuts a new path. They are willing to abandon old goals that are no longer feasible and invent new ones that match the new situation. They view the crisis not as a wall, but as a puzzle to be solved. The power of dissipative structures. In the physical sciences, there is a concept known as dissipative structures. These are systems, like living organisms, that maintain their order by taking in energy from their disordered surroundings. They feed on chaos to sustain their complexity. The human mind can function in a similar way. The person who has mastered flow is effectively a dissipative structure. They have the capacity to take the negative energy of frustration, pain, and fear and convert it into the positive energy of a structured task. They do not deny the existence of chaos. They metabolize it. Consider the difference between a person who is annoyed by a delayed flight and one who uses the time to read a challenging book or strike up a conversation. The former is a victim of entropy. Their psychic energy is dissipated in useless anger. The latter creates order out of the disorder. They use the waste time to add complexity to their self. This ability to transform neutral or negative events into sources of flow is the ultimate defense against the indifference of the universe. It means that one is never truly at the mercy of external circumstances, for even the bleakest situation can be restructured into a challenge that provides enjoyment. The autotelic self. A summary. Throughout this exploration, we have returned again and again to the concept of the autotelic self, the self that has self-contained goals. This is not a fixed character trait that one is born with, but a skill that can be cultivated. It is the culmination of all the principles of flow. The autotelic self is characterized by a specific way of engaging with the world. It is a self that sets its own goals rather than accepting those dictated by society or biology. It is a self that is immersed in the activity of the present moment, rather than being fixated on future rewards. It is a self that seeks complexity, constantly pushing the boundaries of its skills. Such a person is rarely bored, seldom anxious, and involved with what goes on around them. They feel they are in control of their lives, not because they dominate their environment, but because they control their own attention. They are independent of the good opinion of others because their rewards are internal. Developing an autotelic self is a lifelong project. It requires the discipline to restructure one's daily life, to choose active engagement over passive consumption, and to find meaning in the mundane. But the reward is a life that is not merely endured, but deeply enjoyed. A life where the division between work and play dissolves, and every moment holds the potential for growth. It is, in the final analysis, the only true freedom we can possess. Chapter 10. The Making of Meaning. It is a curious paradox that a person can command immense skill and joy in a specific domain, striking a tennis ball with precision, manipulating chess pieces with genius, or painting a masterpiece, yet remain a fractured, unhappy spirit once the game is over or the brush is laid to rest. Flow in a specific activity does not automatically bleed into the rest of existence. It is entirely possible to be a virtuoso on the court and a wreck in the living room. To insulate oneself entirely from the chaos of existence, it is not enough to find isolated islands of flow. One must construct a bridge that connects these islands, transforming the entirety of life into a single, unified flow experience. If a person can construct a goal difficult enough to demand all their attention, yet reachable enough to sustain hope, every action undertaken will serve that overarching purpose. When the disparate parts of life, work, family, leisure, community, are integrated by a singular intention, the entropy of doubt and regret is banished. Past, present, and future align. Life acquires meaning. What meaning means. The word meaning is notoriously slippery, a semantic hall of mirrors. Yet, when we dissect it, we find three distinct definitions that illuminate the path to a coherent life. The first definition points to purpose or significance. We ask, what is the meaning of life? In the same way we ask for the point of a story, we are looking for the end goal, the teleological target that justifies the events leading up to it. The second definition relates to intention. When we say someone means well, we are referring to their volition. A person who means something is a person whose internal desires are expressed in consistent external action. Meaning, in this sense, is the triumph of will over randomness. The third definition is cognitive. It refers to ordering information. When we say red sky at night means shepherd's delight, we are establishing a relationship between distinct events, creating order out of data. Context is established. Things fall into place. Creating meaning in life involves all three. It requires a purpose, a goal, that focuses psychic energy. It requires resolve, intention, to pursue that goal despite distractions. And finally, the successful pursuit of that goal creates harmony, order, allowing the mind to interpret the world as a coherent whole rather than a chaotic jumble. When these three elements converge, the self becomes an autotelic entity, stable and purposeful, immune to the senselessness of the universe. Cultivating purpose. In the absence of a unified purpose, consciousness reverts to its natural state of entropy. Attention scatters. We move from one petty desire to the next, hunger, vanity, entertainment, without a thread to bind them. To escape this, one must cultivate a purpose that organizes the energy of a lifetime. Throughout history, cultures have provided ready-made templates for such purposes. In ancient Greece, the ultimate goal was often immortality through heroic deeds. The heroes strove for a glory that would echo in the memories of descendants. In the Christian tradition, the goal shifted to eternity, the salvation of the soul through union with the divine. Both systems, though different, solved the problem of mortality by connecting the individual's short life to something permanent. Today, however, the traditional scripts have frayed. We live in a culture that offers a dizzying array of choices but few certitudes. We oscillate between sensate cultures, which focus on material comfort and sensory pleasure, and ideational cultures, which focus on abstract, spiritual, or ideological principles. The challenge for the modern individual is to synthesize these or to forge a new path entirely. Psychologists suggest that the development of a life purpose often follows a spiral of increasing complexity. It begins with the preservation of the self, survival, and comfort. Once secure, the focus expands to the community, conformity to the values of family or religion. In the third stage, the individual breaks away again, seeking autonomous growth and self-actualization. Finally, in the fourth stage, the fully realized individual reintegrates with the world, merging their personal interests with a larger, universal cause. This is the path from selfishness to altruism, not through self-abnegation, but through self-expansion. Forging resolve. A goal without the will to execute it is merely a daydream. He who desires but acts not, wrote William Blake, breeds pestilence. The rot of unfulfilled potential breeds envy, frustration, and cynicism. Resolve is the engine that translates purpose into reality. Resolve is tested when goals conflict. The modern world is a supermarket of possibilities, and the abundance of choice often leads to a paralysis of will. We want to be successful professionals, but also attentive parents, and also world travelers, and also fit athletes. When these goals clash, when the late night at the office steals time from the family, entropy sets in. We doubt our choices, we hesitate. The autotelic person, the one who has an internal compass, avoids this dissipation of energy by stripping away extraneous desires. They do not fret about the road not taken. Like the pilgrims who crossed an ocean for the freedom of conscience, or the scientist consumed by the mystery of the atom, they place all their chips on one number. This might seem restrictive to the modern mind, obsessed as it is with keeping options open. But total commitment to a finite set of goals is the only way to achieve the flow state that makes life worth living. It is the constraint that makes the art possible. Recovering harmony. When purpose is clear and resolve is firm, the result is inner harmony. This is not the passive peace of a stone, but the dynamic equilibrium of a spinning gyroscope. The person in harmony acts with a unified consciousness. Thoughts, feelings, and actions are congruent. There is no internal saboteur whispering doubts, no superego warring with an id. It is tempting to romanticize the natural harmony of animals or children who seem to live in a state of perpetual flow. A lion basking in the sun is not tortured by ambition. A child playing with a doll is not worried about her pension. But their harmony is the harmony of innocence, of limited choices. As complexity increases, as the brain evolves and culture expands, conflict becomes inevitable. We cannot go back to the Garden of Eden. We must move forward to a new, constructed harmony, one based on reason and conscious choice. We must choose to order our minds, rather than hoping order will descend upon us. The unification of meaning in life. Themes. When a life is structured by a complex, self-chosen purpose, it acquires a life theme. This theme becomes the plot of the individual's narrative, the underlying logic that interprets every event. Life themes often emerge from a discovered rather than an accepted purpose. An accepted theme is simply taking on a role society hands you, the good corporate soldier, the pious believer. These work well enough in stable times, but they are fragile. If the corporation collapses or the church is corrupted, the individual is left stranded. A discovered theme, however, is forged from personal struggle. Consider the story of E, a man who grew up in poverty. As a child, he was hit by a car driven by a wealthy doctor. The doctor promised to pay for the damage if the police were not involved, but then reneged, leaving E's immigrant father with a crushing debt. Instead of becoming cynical, E found a life theme in this injustice. He vowed to understand the law so that the poor could not be exploited. He became a lawyer, then a judge, and spent his life protecting the rights of the voiceless. The trauma did not break him. It gave him a purpose. He transformed entropy into a complex order that enriched not only his own life, but the wider community. This is the ultimate task, to take the raw materials of our existence, the good fortune and the tragedy, the genetic inheritance and the social conditioning, and shape them into a coherent narrative. When we do this, we are no longer pawns of fate. We become the authors of our own lives. The meaning of life is not a secret hidden in a vault. It is the active creation of a meaningful life.